Eleanor Mitchell stood motionless on the Pine Valley station platform, her solitary trunk at her side, watching as the train that had carried her over 1,800 miles disappeared around the bend. The crushing weight of what had just transpired settled upon her shoulders like lead. William Preston, the man who had exchanged letters with her for nearly a year, the man who had promised her a new beginning as his wife, had taken one glance at her face and stepped back in revulsion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This isn't what I agreed to, he had stated, his voice as cold as the mountain air. Your letters never mentioned. This. His eyes had fixed on the left side of her face, where a web of scars stretched from her temple to her jaw. The permanent reminder of the boarding house fire that had claimed her piano and livelihood 3 years ago. The May breeze swept across the platform, rustling her navy blue traveling dress and loosening strands from her carefully arranged chestnut hair. At 36, Eleanor was acutely aware that she now found herself stranded in an unfamiliar frontier town with merely $22 to her name and absolutely no prospects. The wooden bench at the edge of the platform offered little comfort. As Eleanor lowered herself onto it, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. Around her, Pine Valley hummed with midday activity. Lumber wagons rumbling down the main street, shopkeepers arranging displays, the distant whine of the sawmill that was clearly the lifeblood of this Oregon settlement. None of it registered properly as she stared blankly at the small railroad station's weather-beaten sign. What would she do now? Return to Boston, where her music teaching position had evaporated after parents withdrew their children, claiming her appearance disturbed. The little ones? Where her landlady had recently raised the rent beyond her means, where not a single soul would notice or care if she simply disappeared. William's letters had seemed like divine providence when she'd first read his advertisement in the newspaper. Successful rancher in Oregon Territory seeks educated woman of good character to be his wife. Their correspondence had given her hope, his words speaking of respect, mutual interests in literature and music, and the promise of a secure future together. Not once had he mentioned beauty as a requirement, which had given Eleanor the courage to respond and eventually accept his proposal. She had been forthright about her age, her background as a music teacher, and her desire for a fresh start after losing her position. What she hadn't explicitly described were the scars that twisted across her face, the result of awakening disoriented in the smoke-filled boarding house, her desperate attempts to save her cherished piano and music compositions, resulting in burning timber crashing down upon her. Her musical compositions had been lost forever. Her smooth skin had met the same fate. Waiting for someone, miss? Eleanor looked up to see a station worker regarding her with mild curiosity, his weathered face testifying to years spent under the Oregon sun. I was, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. But they're not coming. Something like understanding crossed the man's face, but he merely nodded. Station closes at 5. Next eastbound train won't be through until Friday. Friday, 4 days away. 4 days to somehow find enough money for a ticket back to a city that had already rejected her. The magnitude of her situation pressed in, threatening to overwhelm her. Thank you, she managed, and the worker moved on, leaving her alone with her thoughts once more. The lunch bell from what appeared to be a small hotel across the street rang out, reminding Eleanor that she hadn't eaten since early morning. Food seemed trivial in the face of her predicament, but practical sense prevailed. She would need her strength to figure out what to do next. Standing up, she straightened her spine and adjusted her hair. A lifetime of proper upbringing asserting itself even now. With as much dignity as she could muster, she picked up her trunk and made her way down the platform steps. The main street of Pine Valley was bustling with activity, lumber workers in rough clothes, shopkeepers, and what appeared to be the more prosperous town residents going about their business. The relatively new settlement had a raw, unfinished quality to it. The buildings a mixture of hastily constructed wooden structures and more substantial establishments that suggested the town's growing prosperity. The White Pine Inn, according to the swinging sign, seemed her best option for a meal and perhaps information about temporary work. $22 wouldn't last long, but Eleanor knew she needed to start somewhere. As she approached the inn's porch, the door swung open abruptly, nearly colliding with her. William Preston emerged, his handsome face set in obvious irritation. He halted suddenly upon seeing Eleanor, his expression hardening. "Miss Mitchell," he said stiffly, "I assumed you'd already arranged return transportation." Eleanor met his gaze directly, refusing to show weakness, despite how deeply his rejection had wounded her. "The next eastbound train isn't until Friday, Mr. Preston. I need accommodations until then." William shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if concerned someone might witness their conversation. "Look, I'm sorry about how things turned out, but you should have been forthright about your condition." The words stung worse than any physical blow. "My condition doesn't affect my ability to play piano or teach music or be a good partner," Eleanor replied, her voice low but firm. "I was forthright about everything that should matter." William's jaw tightened. A man has a right to know what he's getting. He gestured vaguely toward her face, never quite looking directly at it. "You should have mentioned them. And you should have mentioned that you were looking for decorative value rather than character," Eleanor countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Boston society had trained her to be accommodating, to hide her disappointments. But something about being here with nothing left to lose freed her tongue. William's face darkened. "I have a position in this community. People have expectations." "Yes, I imagine they do," Eleanor said quietly. "Excuse me, Mr. Preston. I need to secure lodging." She moved a step past him, but he caught her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "The train ticket," he said, lowering his voice. "I'll pay for your return to Boston. Wait here." He disappeared back into the inn before she could respond, leaving Eleanor standing there, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Even his attempt at generosity felt like another dismissal, a payment to ensure she vanished from his life as quickly as possible. Through the window, she could see him speaking to the innkeeper, gesturing in her direction. The innkeeper, a portly man with a thick mustache, glanced at her with undisguised curiosity, then nodded to whatever William was saying. A few moments later, William emerged with a small envelope, which he thrust toward her awkwardly. "This should cover your ticket and meals until Friday. The inn has no vacancies due to the lumber company executives being in town, but Jensen at the general store has rooms he sometimes rents above his shop. It's not much, but it's clean." Eleanor stared at the envelope, pride warring with practicality. She had $22 to her name. A train ticket east would cost nearly all of it, leaving nothing for food or shelter in the meantime. "Thank you," she said finally, accepting the envelope without meeting his eyes. William nodded curtly. "I trust this resolves our arrangement, Miss Mitchell. Good day." As he walked away toward the far end of town, his back straight and steps brisk, Eleanor exhaled slowly. In just a few hours, her hopes for a new beginning had been shattered, leaving her stranded and humiliated in a town where her only contact clearly wished she would disappear. The sun had risen high overhead, casting short shadows across the street. With a sigh, Eleanor picked up her trunk again and made her way toward the general store William had mentioned. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She would secure lodging first, then find something to eat, one step at a time, as her grandmother used to say. Jensen's General Store occupied a prominent position on Main Street, a large weathered structure with wide windows displaying everything from tools to fabric. Next door stood a smaller building with a sign identifying it as Harrington Woodworks, the rhythmic sound of sawing emanating from within. Setting down her trunk with relief, the thing felt as though it were filled with bricks. Eleanor approached the store entrance. Inside, the establishment was well organized despite the vast array of merchandise crammed into every available space. A thin, elderly man with spectacles was measuring fabric for a woman with two small children in tow. "I'll be with you momentarily," the man called, not looking up from his careful measurements. Eleanor waited patiently, taking in the sights and smells of the store. Coffee beans, leather, spices, and the peculiar mixture of scents that seemed common to all general stores regardless of location. When the woman and her children had been served, the elderly man approached with a kind smile that faltered only momentarily as he registered Eleanor's scarred face. "How may I help you, Miss?" "Mitchell, Eleanor Mitchell," she supplied. "I was told you might have a room available to rent." "That would be my brother Oscar's domain," the man replied, adjusting his spectacles. "I'm Edward Jensen. Oscar handles the boarding rooms upstairs." He glanced toward the ceiling. "He's likely up there now, doing repairs. Backstairs or through that door." "Thank you," Eleanor said, picking up her trunk once more. "You'll be staying in Pine Valley?" "Long?" Edward asked, curiosity evident in his tone. "Just until Friday's train," Eleanor replied, not wishing to elaborate on her circumstances. Understanding dawned in Edward's eyes, followed by what might have been sympathy. "Ah, well, Oscar's rooms are simple but clean, $5 a week. Includes a hot supper." Gratitude washed over Eleanor. $5 would leave her enough from William's money and her own to purchase a train ticket with a small amount to spare. "That's very reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Jensen." She had just lifted her trunk again when a deep voice spoke from the doorway. "Let me help you with that." Eleanor turned to find herself facing a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s. He wore a canvas apron covered in sawdust, and his rolled-up shirt sleeves revealed muscular forearms marked with calluses and what appeared to be old burn scars. But it was his face that captured and held her attention. The right side was handsome enough, strong jaw, straight nose, clear blue eyes beneath dark brows. But the left side bore extensive burn scars, more severe than her own, pulling his mouth slightly downward and leaving a patchwork of healed tissue from temple to neck. The man met her gaze steadily, neither hiding his scars nor calling attention to them. When his eyes briefly took in her own scarred face, there was no shock, no revulsion, just a flicker of recognition. "I've got it," Eleanor said automatically, the ingrained independence of years making her refuse before she could think better of it. The corner of his mouth, the unaffected side, lifted slightly. "No doubt you do, ma'am, but that doesn't mean you should have to." Without waiting for further argument, he bent and lifted her trunk with ease, as if it contained nothing heavier than linens. "Boarding rooms?" he asked, and when Eleanor nodded, he continued, "Through here then. Edward giving you the usual warm welcome." This last was directed at the shopkeeper, who snorted good-naturedly. "More welcome than you give most folks, Gabriel Harrington. Now stop frightening my customers with your sawdust-covered self." The exchange held the comfortable familiarity of long association, and despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling faintly. The tall man, Gabriel, caught the expression and returned it, his scarred face transforming with unexpected warmth. "Don't mind Edward," he said, as he led the way toward a door at the back of the store. "He saves his charm for paying customers. They tip better, according to him." "Heard that!" Edward called after them, prompting a deep chuckle from Gabriel. The stairs behind the door were narrow but well-maintained, leading to a small landing, with several doors off it. Gabriel set her trunk down carefully before knocking on the first door. "Oscar, you've got a potential boarder." The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, clearly related to Edward from downstairs, but with a more weathered appearance. His eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of Eleanor, but like his brother, any reaction to her scars was fleeting. "Looking for a room, Miss Mitchell, Eleanor Mitchell, just until Friday's train." Oscar nodded, pushing the door open wider. "Got 2 available. This one here's the smaller, $3 for the week. Larger one down the hall is $5, includes supper." The room was indeed small, just enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand and a chest of drawers, with a small window overlooking the back alley. But it was clean, the linens fresh, and at this point Eleanor was simply grateful for a private space. "This will be perfect," she said, reaching for her reticule to count out the money. $3, you said? "Actually," Gabriel interjected, still standing in the doorway, "Miss Mitchell will take the larger room." "Put it on my account, Oscar." Eleanor turned to him in surprise. "That's not necessary, Mr. Harrington. I can manage—" "Gabe," he corrected gently, "and I'm sure you can. But you've had a long journey, and the larger room has a proper writing desk. Seems fitting for a lady of education." How he had discerned she was educated, Eleanor couldn't guess. Perhaps William had mentioned it in town, though that seemed unlikely. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly accept. Consider it Pine Valley's welcome," Gabriel said, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her momentarily forget her protests. Small towns should look after travelers. Oscar glanced between them with poorly concealed interest. "Larger rooms this way, then. First door on the right." The room in question was indeed more spacious, with a full-sized bed, a small writing desk by the window, and even a rocking chair in the corner. A rag rug covered part of the wooden floor, adding a touch of warmth to the simple space. Gabriel set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Settling in all right, Miss Mitchell?" "Please call me Eleanor," she said, then added with a small smile, "If I'm to call you Gabe." Something in his expression shifted, a softening perhaps, or a hint of pleased surprise. "Eleanor, then." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I run the woodworking shop next door. If you need anything during your stay, don't hesitate to ask." Before she could thank him again, Oscar cleared his throat. "Supper's at 6 in the dining room downstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." "Thank you both," Eleanor said sincerely. "You've been very kind to a stranger." "Strangers are just friends we haven't met properly yet," Oscar replied philosophically. "Come on, Gabe, let the lady get settled." As the men left, closing the door behind them, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. In the space of hours, she had arrived full of hope, been cruelly rejected, and somehow found herself the recipient of unexpected kindness from strangers. The tears she had been holding back since William's rejection finally spilled over, streaming down her cheeks in silent release. She cried not just for today's humiliation, but for all the losses of the past 3 years. Her music school position, her compositions, her place in society, and the smooth skin that had once allowed her to move through the world unremarked and unrejected. When the tears finally subsided, Eleanor moved to the small mirror above the washstand. With deliberate care, she studied the reflection that had caused William Preston such disgust. The burn scars pulled the left corner of her mouth slightly upward, giving her a perpetual half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. The patchwork of healed tissue extended from her hairline to her jaw, a roadmap of that terrible night. For 3 years, she had avoided mirrors when possible, arranged her hair to partially shield her face, and learned to anticipate the moment when a new acquaintance's eyes would widen in shock or discomfort. William's reaction had been crueler than most, but not fundamentally different. But Gabriel Harrington's response had been unlike any she'd encountered. In his steady gaze had been neither pity nor revulsion, just straightforward recognition, as if he saw her scars as merely one aspect of her person, neither defining nor particularly remarkable. Of course, Eleanor thought, his own scars explained that. He understood the silent burden of moving through the world with a face that made others uncomfortable. The realization brought an unexpected sense of connection to this stranger who had shown her simple kindness. Splashing water on her face from the wash basin, Eleanor tidied her appearance as best she could. She would allow herself this one afternoon of self-pity, but tomorrow would require practical action. 4 days until the train departed, 4 days to recover her dignity and prepare for whatever awaited her back in Boston. For now, though, she would rest, grateful for a clean bed and the small kindnesses of strangers that had made this devastating day somewhat bearable. The gentle rap on her door roused Eleanor from her unintended nap. Disoriented momentarily, she sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress and hair as she called, "One moment, please." A quick glance in the mirror confirmed her appearance was somewhat presentable, though her eyes remained slightly puffy from earlier tears. Opening the door, she was surprised to find Rebecca Collins, according to the flour-dusted apron she wore, over a practical blue dress. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Rebecca Collins. Everyone calls me Becky, from the bakery down the street," the young woman said with a friendly smile that barely faltered as she registered Eleanor's scars. "Oscar mentioned we had a new guest, and I thought you might appreciate some fresh bread with your supper." She held out a cloth-wrapped bundle that emanated a mouth-watering aroma. The simple kindness of the gesture caught Eleanor off guard. "That's very thoughtful of you, Miss Collins." "Becky, please," she insisted, handing over the bread. "And it's nothing special. Pine Valley's small enough that newcomers are cause for interest, especially—" She hesitated, then continued, "with frank honesty, especially when William Preston's involved. Word travels fast in small towns." So they already knew of her rejection. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Becky's expression held no mockery, only a kind of sympathetic understanding. "William Preston isn't the final authority on worth. In Pine Valley," Becky added, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Between us, you're better off without him. Man's got more pride than sense." A startled laugh escaped Eleanor at this blunt assessment. "You're very kind to say so." "Not kindness, just truth," Becky replied with a shrug. "Anyway, supper should be ready soon. I thought you might want company walking down. New places can be awkward." Eleanor's throat tightened at this casual thoughtfulness. "I'd appreciate that, thank you." As they descended the stairs together, Becky kept up a steady stream of information about Pine Valley, which establishments offered the best goods, which people were most reliable, which parts of town were best avoided after dark. It was exactly the sort of practical knowledge a newcomer would need, delivered without condescension or pity. The dining room turned out to be a modest space behind the general store, with 3 large tables that could accommodate about 20 people in total. Several boarders were already seated, a pair of lumber workers. An elderly woman Eleanor guessed might be a seamstress from her measuring tape draped around her neck, and to her surprise, Gabriel Harrington. He looked up as they entered, the undamaged side of his mouth lifting in that half-smile she was beginning to recognize. He had removed his work apron and washed up, though his clothes still bore traces of sawdust. "Miss Mitchell," he acknowledged with a nod. Then to her companion, "Becky, you've met our visitor." "Just now?" Becky confirmed, guiding Eleanor to the table. "Thought she might appreciate some company." Gabriel's gaze met Eleanor's briefly. "Good thinking." Oscar Jensen emerged from what must be the kitchen, carrying a large pot of what smelled like beef stew. His wife, a plump, cheerful woman with silver-streaked dark hair, followed with a basket of cornbread. "Everyone, this is Miss Eleanor Mitchell," Oscar announced. "She'll be with us until Friday's train." The introduction was met with nods and murmured greetings, the other boarders displaying varying degrees of curiosity about her scarred face. But no outright rudeness. Eleanor was once again struck by how different this reception was from what she'd grown accustomed to in Boston, where people either stared openly or made an exaggerated show of not noticing her scars. As bowls of stew were passed around, conversation flowed naturally. The lumber workers discussed the day's work. The elderly seamstress, Mrs. Wilson, Eleanor learned, mentioned a particularly challenging wedding dress she was creating, and Becky described a special order of pastries for the upcoming spring music festival. "Music festival?" Eleanor asked, her interest piqued by the familiar subject. "Annual tradition," Gabriel explained, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "Pine Valley's not much for culture most of the year, but come June, everyone pretends to appreciate music for a weekend." "Don't let Gabe fool you," Becky interjected with a grin. "He attends every year and knows more about classical music than he lets on." Gabriel shrugged, seeming mildly embarrassed by this revelation. "My mother taught piano. Some of it stuck." "Do you play?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about this aspect of the scarred woodworker. "Not anymore," he replied, something in his tone suggesting the subject might be painful. "But I still listen." "You?" "I taught piano in Boston," Eleanor said, surprised at how easy it was to share this with the table of near strangers. "Before," she gestured vaguely to her scarred face, and understanding dawned in several pairs of eyes. "Were you caught in a fire, Miss Mitchell?" Mrs. Wilson asked directly, but with such matter-of-fact kindness that the question didn't feel intrusive. "Yes, at my boarding house," Eleanor confirmed, 3 years ago. "Lost my workshop in Tennessee the same way," Gabriel said quietly. "Wood stove caught the sawdust. Went up like tinder." The simple statement, delivered without drama or self-pity, created an invisible thread of connection between them across the table. Eleanor met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same understanding she'd noticed earlier, the recognition of someone who had also been marked, both physically and otherwise, by fire's indiscriminate destruction. "That's actually a stroke of luck," Becky said suddenly, breaking the moment. When everyone looked at her questioningly, she continued, "Martha Sullivan's been looking for someone to take over her music students. Her arthritis is getting worse, and she's planning to retire after the festival. She'd mentioned writing to a conservatory in Portland, but if there's already a qualified teacher in town." "I'm not staying," Eleanor reminded her gently. "My train leaves Friday." "But you could," Oscar's wife, Mary, Eleanor had learned, interjected thoughtfully. "Pine Valley's growing. We could use a proper music teacher. Martha's students include most of the children from prosperous families. Plus, she plays the church organ on Sundays. It's a respectable living." The suggestion took Eleanor by surprise. She had been so focused on the humiliation of William's rejection and the practical problem of returning to Boston that the possibility of staying, of building a new life here, hadn't even occurred to her. I couldn't possibly," she began, though some small part of her wondered why not. What was really waiting for her in Boston? More rejection? More doors closing because of her scars? "At least meet with Martha before you decide," Becky suggested. "The music school's just behind the church. I could take you tomorrow morning." "I'd be happy to introduce you," Gabriel offered unexpectedly. "She's my neighbor, and I've been repairing her piano. Was planning to stop by anyway." The earnestness in his expression made it difficult to refuse outright. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to meet her," Eleanor conceded. "But I don't want to raise false hopes. My plans are to return to Boston, Gabriel nodded, respecting her position. Fair enough. Shall we say 9 o'clock? I can meet you here. As the meal continued, the conversation drifted to other topics. The lumber company's expansion, speculation about the railroad's plans to extend a line through the valley, and preparations for the upcoming festival. Throughout it all, Eleanor found herself drawn into the easy camaraderie of these people who had so readily accepted her presence among them. By the time the meal concluded, she felt more welcome in this dining room of near strangers than she had in any Boston parlor since the fire. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because the simple human connection had been sorely missed. Unsettling because it highlighted how profoundly isolated she had become in the city she'd called home. As the boarders dispersed for the evening, Gabriel lingered behind, seeming to want a private word. "Pine Valley's not Boston," he said, once they were alone in the dining room. "People here judge by actions more than appearances. Just something to consider." There was no pressure in his tone, merely an observation offered from one burn survivor to another. "William Preston seems an exception to that rule," Eleanor noted, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Gabriel's expression darkened slightly. "Preston's an exception to many rules. Man moved here from San Francisco 2 years ago, bought the largest ranch in the valley with money no one's quite sure how he earned, and has been trying to remake the town in his image ever since." "His image being one without visible imperfections?" Eleanor surmised. "Exactly." Gabriel met her gaze directly. "But he's not Pine Valley, despite what he might think." The conviction in his voice was oddly reassuring. Before Eleanor could respond, he continued, 9 tomorrow then, for meeting Martha?" "Yes, thank you," she agreed, finding she was genuinely looking forward to it, regardless of whether anything came of the introduction. As she made her way back to her room, Eleanor's mind was a whirl with new possibilities she hadn't considered before. Pine Valley had initially represented nothing more than the site of her humiliation, a place to leave as quickly as possible. Now, it had begun to reveal different facets. A community where her scars might not be the first or only thing people noticed about her, where her skills as a musician might still be valued. And then there was Gabriel Harrington, with his own scarred face and the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. In his gaze had been neither pity nor revulsion, but something far more precious: recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement of shared experience that required no words. Standing at her window, looking out at the small town settling into evening, Eleanor caught sight of Gabriel crossing the street toward a modest house near the church. His tall figure moved with purpose. Shoulders straight, head unbowed, a man comfortable in his skin despite its imperfections. For the first time since William Preston's cruel rejection that morning, Eleanor felt something stir within her that might, with careful tending, grow into hope. The morning sun filtered through the simple muslin curtains, casting gentle patterns across Eleanor's bed as she woke. For a moment, she felt disoriented, the unfamiliar room bringing confusion until the events of the previous day came rushing back. William Preston's rejection, the kindness of strangers, the unexpected possibility of staying in Pine Valley. She rose and dressed carefully in her second-best day dress, a modest dove gray with white collar and cuffs, after arranging her chestnut hair in a simple but neat chignon. She took a moment to study her reflection. The scars remained, of course. They would never disappear. But this morning, they seemed less defining somehow, as if the genuine welcome she'd received at supper had softened their impact, even to her own eyes. The dining room was quieter at breakfast than it had been the evening before. The lumber workers had departed early for their shift, leaving only Mrs. Wilson sipping tea at one table while she basted a hem, and Mary Jensen bustling about with plates of flapjacks and bacon. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," Mary greeted her, warmly. "Sleep well, I hope." "Better than expected, thank you." Eleanor replied, accepting the offered plate with gratitude. Gabe was by earlier, Mary mentioned casually as she poured coffee into a sturdy mug. Said to tell you he'd meet you at the church at 9 instead of here. Something about needing to deliver a repaired pew first. Eleanor nodded, surprised by the small flutter of anticipation she felt at the prospect of seeing Gabriel again. She reminded herself sternly that he was merely being neighborly, helping a stranded visitor. Nothing more. Is it far to the church? She asked, savoring the rich coffee. Just 3 blocks down and 1 over, Mary replied. You can't miss it. Only building in town with a proper steeple. After finishing her breakfast and thanking Mary, Eleanor stepped out into the morning sunshine. Pine Valley looked different in daylight, more welcoming than it had appeared yesterday. The main street bustled with activity, storekeepers sweeping their boardwalks, wagons delivering goods, and townspeople going about their morning business. Several people nodded greetings as she passed, a few with curious glances at her scarred face, but none with the revulsion she'd grown accustomed to in Boston. Perhaps Gabriel was right about Pine Valley, judging by actions more than appearances. The church was indeed easy to find, its white steeple rising above the surrounding buildings. As Eleanor approached, she noticed Gabriel's tall figure waiting on the steps, deep in conversation with an elderly woman who appeared to be in her 70s. They both looked up as Eleanor drew near. Miss Mitchell, Gabriel acknowledged with a nod, the undamaged side of his mouth lifting in that now familiar half-smile. May I present Martha Sullivan, Pine Valley's musical cornerstone for the past 20 years. The elderly woman studied Eleanor with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, taking in both her scarred face and her careful posture. So, you're a piano teacher, are you? Martha asked without preamble, her voice surprisingly strong for her age. From Boston, Gabe tells me. Yes, ma'am, Eleanor confirmed. I taught for 12 years at the Winthrop Academy for Young Ladies, and privately before. That, Martha nodded, apparently satisfied with this credential. Play something for me then. My hands aren't what they used to be, but my ears work just fine. The directness of the request caught Eleanor off guard, but she found she didn't mind. After years of people tiptoeing around her abilities because of her appearance, Martha's straightforward approach was refreshing. I'd be happy to, she said simply. Martha led them around the church to a small attached building that bore a discreet sign, Sullivan School of Music. Inside, the main room was dominated by a well-maintained upright piano with several chairs, arranged for students, and shelves lined with sheet music and instructional books. Gabe just finished repairing the action on the upper register, Martha explained, gesturing to the piano. Been sticking something awful. Says it's fixed now, but I'll have you be the judge. Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, over his broad chest. No pressure, he murmured with a hint of humor in his voice. Eleanor removed her gloves and settled on the bench, taking a moment to center herself. It had been months since she'd played on anything but the battered upright at the Boston boarding house. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and suddenly she knew exactly what to play. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had always seemed to express both melancholy and hope in equal measure. The first notes flowed from her fingers, tentative. At first, then with growing confidence, as the familiar music transported her. The piano's tone was surprisingly good for a small-town instrument, and Gabriel's repairs had indeed resolved any issues with the upper register. Eleanor lost herself in the music, eyes closed, feeling the tension of the past days melt away as the melody filled the small room. When the final notes faded, the silence that followed seemed almost sacred. Eleanor opened her eyes to find Martha, watching her with an expression of undisguised approval, while Gabriel's face held something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, of the emotion she'd poured into the performance. Well, Martha said finally, that answers that question. You can certainly play. Beautifully, Gabriel added quietly. Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at the simple compliment. I have 18 students currently, Martha continued, all business now, ages 7 to 17, plus 3 adults. Lessons twice weekly, recital at Christmas, and again at the Spring Festival. Church pays separate for Sunday services and choir accompaniment. She named a monthly sum that, while modest compared to Boston rates, would provide a comfortable living in a small town like Pine Valley. I'd introduce you properly, of course, smooth the transition. The pragmatic offer left Eleanor momentarily speechless. This was far more than the casual suggestion Becky had made at supper. This was a concrete opportunity, a chance to rebuild her life using the skills she still possessed. It's very generous of you, she began, unsure how to respond. But I'm scheduled to return to Boston on Friday. Martha's shrewd eyes narrowed slightly. What's waiting for you there? The blunt question caught Eleanor off guard. What indeed? No teaching position, a boarding house room she could barely afford, former friends and acquaintances who had quietly distanced themselves after her disfigurement. My things, she finished lamely. My few remaining possessions. Things can be shipped, Martha pointed out practically, or replaced. Gabriel, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Perhaps Miss Mitchell needs time to consider, he suggested gently. It's a significant decision. Martha nodded, relenting. Fair enough. Train doesn't leave till Friday. That gives you 3 days to decide. In the meantime, you're welcome to observe my lessons. First student arrives at 10. The offer seemed reasonable, and Eleanor found herself nodding. Thank you. I'd like that. Good. Settled then. Martha turned to Gabriel. The piano action is much improved. Your father would be proud of your work. Something flickered in Gabriel's expression at the mention of his father. A brief shadow quickly concealed. Needed new hammers on the high C and D, he said, changing the subject. Should hold now. As they stepped outside, leaving Martha to prepare for her first student, Eleanor found herself walking alongside Gabriel in comfortable silence. The morning had taken an unexpected turn, opening possibilities she hadn't considered 24 hours earlier. Your playing is exceptional, Gabriel said finally, as they reached the church steps. Technical skill, obviously, but more than that, you speak through the music. The perceptiveness of his observation surprised her. My teacher used to say, much the same, music should communicate what words cannot. Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Like your Chopin piece, sadness and hope intertwined. Yes, Eleanor agreed, touched that he had heard exactly what she'd felt while playing. Though I'm sure Martha was more concerned with my fingering technique than my emotional interpretation. This drew a genuine laugh from Gabriel, transforming his scarred face. Martha notices everything. If she's offering you her students, she sees both your skill and your heart. He hesitated, then added more quietly, as do others in Pine Valley. The words hung between them, laden with meaning Eleanor wasn't quite ready to examine. Instead, she changed the subject. You mentioned your father was connected to pianos. Gabriel's expression closed slightly, though not in an unfriendly way. He built them, had a small workshop in Knoxville. I learned woodworking at his side. And now you build furniture, Eleanor guessed, gesturing toward his shop. Among other things. Gabriel glanced at the position of the sun. I should get back to work. Will you be all right finding your way to Becky's bakery for lunch? She mentioned inviting you. I'll manage, Eleanor assured him. Thank you for introducing me to Martha. He studied her for a moment, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. Until supper, then. Eleanor watched him walk away, struck by the graceful confidence in his movements despite his large frame. Gabriel Harrington was a puzzle. Reserved yet perceptive, scarred yet seemingly at peace with himself. She found herself curious about his story, about what had brought him from Tennessee to this remote Oregon town, about how he had come to terms with his disfigurement when she still struggled with her own. Pushing these thoughts aside, Eleanor returned to the music school to observe Martha's teaching methods. The morning passed quickly as a succession of students arrived for their lessons. A shy 7-year-old girl just beginning to learn scales. A teenage boy with surprising talent but little discipline. 2 sisters who played simple duets with infectious enthusiasm. Martha's teaching style was firm but encouraging, demanding excellence while acknowledging each student's individual challenges. She introduced Eleanor simply as Miss Mitchell from Boston, an accomplished pianist who might be teaching here soon, treating the possibility as a foregone conclusion. By lunchtime, Eleanor had gained valuable insights into both the students and Martha's curriculum. When the elderly teacher shooed her off to lunch saying, "Go see Becky before she thinks we've forgotten her," Eleanor found herself reluctant to leave the familiar environment of the music room. Becky's bakery was easy to find, a cheerful establishment with blue-painted trim and window boxes filled with early spring flowers. The bell above the door jingled merrily as Eleanor entered, releasing the mouth-watering aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon. "Eleanor," Becky called from behind the counter where she was arranging pastries on a tiered display. "Perfect timing. The lunch rush just ended, and I've saved us a table in the back." The friendly welcome warmed Eleanor as she followed Becky to a small table in the corner, partially screened from the rest of the shop by a wooden partition. "So," Becky prompted as she set down a plate of still warm rolls and 2 bowls of vegetable soup. "What did you think of Martha?" "She's remarkable," Eleanor admitted. "Forthright, certainly, but clearly an excellent teacher." "And the position?" Becky pressed, her expression hopeful. "Are you considering it?" Eleanor hesitated, torn between the unexpected opportunity and the practicalities of such a dramatic change. "It's a generous offer, but I've only been in Pine Valley one day. To decide to stay based on such limited knowledge seems impulsive." "Sometimes the best decisions are made quickly," Becky suggested, breaking open a roll and releasing a cloud of fragrant steam. "I knew the first time I tasted my grandmother's apple cake that I wanted to be a baker, never questioned it since." "This is rather different," Eleanor pointed out gently. "Is it?" Becky countered. "You need employment. Pine Valley needs a music teacher. You've been welcomed more genuinely in one day here than it sounds like you were in years in Boston." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And there's a certain woodworker who seems quite taken with you." Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. "Mr. Harrington is simply being kind to a stranger." Becky's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. "Gabe's lived here 6 years, and I've never seen him go out of his way to be kind to any other female stranger. Man keeps to himself mostly. Works, attends church, helps neighbors when needed, but doesn't socialize much." "Because of his scars?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "Partly, I think. People's reactions can be cruel, as you well know." Becky's expression softened. "But there's more to it. Something happened in Tennessee beyond the fire. He never speaks of it, and Pine Valley folks know better than to pry." The conversation was interrupted by the bell above the door announcing new customers. Becky excused herself to tend to them, leaving Eleanor to consider what she'd learned. Gabriel Harrington was evidently something of a solitary figure in Pine Valley, respected but not truly known. His kindness toward her seemed even more significant in that light. After finishing her lunch and thanking Becky, Eleanor decided to explore the town further before returning to Martha's afternoon lessons. Pine Valley was larger than she'd initially realized, with several cross streets extending from the main thoroughfare. The lumber mill dominated the far end of town, its saws whining in the distance, while the more established businesses clustered in the central blocks. As she walked, Eleanor noted the curious but not unfriendly glances from townspeople. A few nodded greetings, and one woman even stopped to introduce herself as the mother of one of Martha's piano students. "Jimmy mentioned meeting you this morning," the woman said warmly. "Said you played the prettiest music he'd ever heard." The simple compliment touched Eleanor deeply. In Boston, parents had gradually withdrawn their children from her studio after the fire, making excuses about schedules or finances, but really fearing that her scarred face would somehow harm their children's delicate sensibilities. "Jimmy has considerable talent," Eleanor replied truthfully. "With consistent practice, he could develop into a fine musician." The woman beamed with maternal pride. "That's what Martha says too, though getting him to practice is like pulling teeth some days." "Will you be taking over Martha's students?" I'm considering it," Eleanor acknowledged, surprised to realize that she genuinely was. "Well, I do hope you decide to stay," the woman said sincerely. "Martha's been needing to retire for at least 2 years now, but wouldn't leave us in the lurch without a proper replacement." As the woman continued on her way, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to the possibility of remaining in Pine Valley. The practical obstacles existed, certainly. Her few remaining possessions in Boston, the unfamiliarity of this frontier town, the uncertainty of building a new life from scratch. But set against those concerns was the genuine welcome she'd received, the concrete opportunity Martha offered, and the intangible sense that here, perhaps, she might be valued for her abilities rather than judged for her scars. Lost in thought, Eleanor nearly collided with William Preston as she rounded the corner near the bank. They both stepped back in surprise, William's handsome face darkening with displeasure at the unexpected encounter. "Miss Mitchell," he acknowledged stiffly. "Still in town, I see." Eleanor lifted her chin slightly, refusing to be cowed by his obvious disapproval. "Yes, Mr. Preston, until Friday, as we discussed." William glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with being seen conversing with her on the public street. "I understand Martha Sullivan has offered you her teaching position. News traveled quickly in small towns," Eleanor reflected. "Word reaches you fast, Mr. Preston." His mouth tightened. "Pine Valley's business is my business, Miss Mitchell. As the largest property owner and a significant investor in the town's development, I take an interest in who settles here." The implication was clear. He considered her presence undesirable. A day earlier, his disapproval might have crushed her. Now, bolstered by the acceptance she'd found from others, it merely rankled. "I wasn't aware that Pine Valley required your personal approval for new residents," she replied, keeping her tone even, despite her rising indignation. "It doesn't," came a deep voice from behind her. "Not legally, anyway." Eleanor turned to find Gabriel approaching, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes held a warning as they fixed on William. "Harrington," William acknowledged coldly. "Still interfering in matters that don't concern you, I see." "Just passing by," Gabriel replied mildly, though his posture suggested otherwise. "On my way to discuss the church repairs with Reverend Phillips. Afternoon, Miss Mitchell." The deliberate courtesy in his greeting to Eleanor stood in stark contrast to his curt acknowledgement of William. She found herself grateful for his steady presence beside her. "Mr. Harrington," she returned with a small smile. "How fortunate to run into you." William observed this exchange with obvious distaste. "Well," he said finally, "I won't keep you from your business. Good day." With a curt nod, he continued on his way toward the bank, his back rigid with displeasure. Once he was out of earshot, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly to Gabriel. Though I could have managed. No doubt, he agreed, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. But why should you have to? Preston's influence in this town is substantial, but not absolute, despite what he believes. They fell into step together, walking toward the church by unspoken agreement. He seems particularly opposed to my staying in Pine Valley, Eleanor observed. Beyond the personal rejection, I mean. It feels almost vindictive. Gabriel considered this thoughtfully. Preston cultivates a certain image of refinement, considers himself above the common residents of Pine Valley. He glanced at her, his blue eyes serious. A scarred music teacher doesn't fit the sophisticated town he envisions creating here. Neither does a scarred woodworker, I imagine. Eleanor noted perceptively. No, Gabriel acknowledged, though my business is necessary enough that he tolerates my presence, so long as I keep to my proper place. The bitterness in these last words suggested a history between the two men that went beyond differing backgrounds or appearances. There's more to it than that, Eleanor guessed, studying his profile. Gabriel was silent for several paces, his scarred face thoughtful. Finally, he said, Preston arrived in Pine Valley 2 years ago with grand plans for improving the town. Wanted to build a fancy hotel where my workshop stands. Offered to buy me out at half the property's value. And you refused, Eleanor surmised. It's not just a workshop, Gabriel replied simply. It's my home, my place in the world. Eleanor understood completely. After losing so much, smooth skin, professional standing, social acceptance, the things that remained became all the more precious. So now he supports the railroad's plans to run tracks directly through your property, she concluded, putting together pieces of conversations she'd overheard. Gabriel nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. Convenient for him, if eminent. Domain forces what money couldn't buy. Judge Thompson's in his pocket, and Mayor Davis seems easily swayed by Preston's talk of progress. They had reached the church steps, but neither made a move to part ways. Eleanor found herself strangely comfortable in Gabriel's presence, despite having known him only a day. "Will you fight it?" she asked. "The railroad plan?" "With everything I have," he answered without hesitation. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem stacked against you." Something in his tone suggested he wasn't speaking, only of his workshop, and Eleanor felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with property disputes. "Yes," she agreed softly. "Some things are." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the scarred portions of their faces seemed to fade into insignificance, leaving only the connection between two people who understood loss, resilience, and the value of starting anew. The church bell chimed the hour, breaking the moment. Gabriel cleared his throat. "I should see Reverend Phillips about those repairs. And I promised Martha I'd return for her afternoon lessons," Eleanor remembered. They parted with the ease of old friends rather than new acquaintances, each to their separate tasks, but somehow connected by the conversation they'd shared. The remainder of the afternoon passed quickly as Eleanor observed more of Martha's lessons, occasionally demonstrating techniques when the elderly teacher's arthritic hands proved troublesome. By the time the final student departed at 4 o'clock, Eleanor had gained a thorough understanding of both the teaching opportunity and the community she would be serving if she chose to stay. "Well?" Martha asked bluntly as they tidied the music room together. "What do you think? Can you see yourself teaching here?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "The students are promising, your curriculum is sound, and the position itself is certainly attractive. But," Martha prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation. "But I've been in Pine Valley barely 36 hours, Eleanor pointed out. To make such a life-altering decision based on such limited experience seems unwise." Martha chuckled, the sound unexpectedly youthful from her aged frame. My dear, at my age, one develops a sense for when time is of the essence. I need to retire before these hands give out completely. You need a fresh start, where your talents are valued rather than overlooked because of those scars. She gestured matter-of-factly to Eleanor's face. And Pine Valley needs cultural refinement that doesn't come with William Preston's particular brand of condescension. Seems a fortuitous alignment to me. Put that way, it did indeed sound almost providential. Still, Eleanor hesitated. May I have until tomorrow to decide? Take until Thursday if you need it, Martha granted magnanimously. Though I suspect you already know what you want to do. As Eleanor walked back toward the boarding house, she found herself noting details of Pine Valley with new eyes. The sturdy construction of the buildings, the clean-swept boardwalks, the mix of practical, frontier establishments and touches of civilization like Becky's cheerful bakery. Could she make a life here, so far from everything familiar? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of raised voices coming from the direction of the town hall. Curious, she followed the noise to find a crowd gathered outside the municipal building. At the center of the group stood Gabriel, his tall frame unmistakable, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with William Preston and a well-dressed stranger Eleanor didn't recognize. The proposed route is non-negotiable, the stranger was saying, his tone that of a man accustomed to having the final word. The grade through the valley center is optimal for the locomotive requirements and conveniently runs through properties. Preston has been trying to acquire for his hotel development, Gabriel countered, his voice carrying clearly, despite his measured tone. While avoiding his ranch entirely, murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered townspeople. Mr. Harrington's opposition is purely self-interested, William interjected smoothly. He stands to lose his workshop, true, but the compensation offered is more than generous. The greater good of Pine Valley's economic future should outweigh individual concerns. The stranger, clearly a railroad representative of some kind, nodded emphatically. Progress requires sacrifice, I'm afraid. The railroad will bring unprecedented prosperity to Pine Valley. Prosperity for whom? This came from Oscar Jensen, who had pushed to the front of the crowd. Your proposed route cuts through my store, Harrington's workshop, Collins' bakery, and 4 other established businesses. The compensation won't cover the cost of rebuilding, let alone the lost income during construction. More voices joined in, the crowd dividing between those who supported the railroad's plans and those who opposed the specific route. Eleanor observed the dynamics with interest, noting how naturally Gabriel assumed a leadership role among those resisting, despite his normally reserved nature. William, noticing Eleanor at the edge of the crowd, seized the opportunity to change tactics. "Miss Mitchell," he called, drawing unwanted attention to her presence. "As a newcomer with a fresh perspective, perhaps you'd care to weigh in? Surely in Boston you've seen the tremendous advantages railroad connections bring to a community." All eyes turned to Eleanor, and she felt a moment of panic at being put so unexpectedly on the spot. Gabriel's expression revealed nothing, though. She sensed his concern at William's deliberate manipulation. Drawing a deep breath, Eleanor stepped forward. "In Boston, Mr. Preston, I observed that progress is indeed valuable, but not when it comes at the expense of a community's existing character and the livelihoods of its established citizens." A murmur of approval rose from Gabriel's supporters, while William's face darkened. "With respect, Miss Mitchell," he replied with barely concealed disdain, "you've been in Pine Valley for 1 day. Your understanding of our town's needs is necessarily limited." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged, refusing to be intimidated. "But basic principles of fairness aren't limited by geography. If the railroad truly wishes to benefit Pine Valley, surely a route can be found that doesn't displace half the town's businesses." Today, she would take the first concrete step toward building a new life in Pine Valley. The morning air carried the crisp scent of pine as Eleanor made her way toward the music school. Several townsfolk greeted her along the way, no longer regarding her as a curiosity, but as a potential new neighbor. The transformation in their attitude, or perhaps in her perception of it, was remarkable. Martha was arranging sheet music when Eleanor entered the small studio, the elderly woman's arthritic fingers moving with painstaking precision. "I've been expecting you," Martha said without looking up, as if she had sensed Eleanor's presence. "You've made your decision." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Yes, I'd like to accept your offer if it still stands." Martha finally turned, her sharp blue eyes studying Eleanor's face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, for she nodded once, decisively. "Good. We'll begin the transition immediately. You can observe my teaching methods this week. Take on some lessons yourself starting next Monday, and I'll formally introduce you at the Spring Music Festival in 3 weeks." The efficient plan left no room for hesitation or second thoughts. Eleanor found herself smiling at the older woman's brisk certainty. "I'll need to find permanent housing. Clara Wilson has a cottage behind her dress shop she rents to respectable single ladies," Martha said promptly. "Nothing fancy, but clean and private. Piano would fit nicely in the front room. $7 monthly." Eleanor blinked, surprised by this ready solution. "How did you know I would accept?" Martha's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Recognized something in your playing yesterday. Same thing I saw in Gabriel Harrington's face when he first arrived in Pine Valley 6 years ago, looking for a place to heal, to be valued for what you can do, rather than judged for what you look like." She shrugged, simple enough to understand. The perceptiveness of this assessment left Eleanor momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the door opened to admit Gabriel himself, carrying a small wooden box. "Morning," he greeted them both, his gaze lingering briefly on Eleanor's face. "Brought those replacement felts for the piano hammers, Martha." His eyes shifted to Eleanor again. "Have you—" "Miss Mitchell has accepted the position," Martha informed him with evident satisfaction. "She'll be staying in Pine Valley." Something shifted in Gabriel's expression, relief perhaps, or pleasure, before his features settled into their usual reserved lines. "The town will benefit from your talents," he said simply. "I've already told her about Clara Wilson's cottage," Martha continued, taking the box of felts. "Perhaps you could show her the place after my morning lessons. Clara keeps the key with her at the dress shop." Gabriel nodded, seemingly unsurprised by Martha's presumption in volunteering his services. "Happy to, if Miss Mitchell wishes." "That would be very kind," Eleanor agreed, finding she was genuinely looking forward to spending more time in his company. Martha made a shooing motion with her hands. "Off with both of you then. My first student arrives in 15 minutes, and I need to prepare. Eleanor, return at 1 o'clock to observe the afternoon lessons." Outside in the morning sunshine, Eleanor and Gabriel stood for a moment in companionable silence before he spoke. "You've decided to stay then?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I received news this morning that made the decision clearer. There's nothing left for me in Boston now, quite literally as it happens. Another fire." Gabriel's scarred face registered immediate understanding. "Your possessions?" "All gone," Eleanor said, surprised by how little the loss troubled her. "Now, but perhaps that's fitting. A clean break with the past, as I begin again here." He studied her thoughtfully. "Takes courage to start over. Not everyone has it." "I think," Eleanor said slowly, "that sometimes courage is simply the absence of alternatives. One keeps going because there's nothing else to be done." "Perhaps," Gabriel acknowledged, "or perhaps true courage is choosing to keep going when surrender would be easier." He gestured down the street. "Clara's shop is this way, if you'd like to see the cottage now." They walked side by side, drawing curious glances from townspeople, still unaccustomed to seeing the reserved woodworker in female company. Eleanor found she didn't mind the attention, which held more friendly interest than malicious gossip. Clara Wilson's dress shop occupied a tidy building on a side street just off the main thoroughfare. The window displayed several fashionable gowns that would not have looked out of place in Boston, suggesting that Pine Valley's ladies maintained certain standards despite their frontier location. The bell above the door chimed softly as they entered. A middle-aged woman with graying auburn hair looked up from where she was pinning a hemline, her face lighting with recognition. Gabriel Harrington, twice in 1 month. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, curiosity evident in her expression. Miss Eleanor Mitchell, Gabriel introduced. She's taking over Martha Sullivan's teaching position. Martha mentioned you have a cottage for rent. Oh, you're the piano teacher everyone's talking about, Clara said warmly, setting aside her work and extending her hand. Welcome to Pine Valley, Miss Mitchell. Eleanor accepted the handshake, noting with appreciation that Clara's gaze met hers, directly, with only a momentary glance at her scarred cheek. Thank you. Martha speaks highly of your cottage. It's nothing grand, Clara cautioned, retrieving a key from a drawer behind the counter. Just a small place I had built for my sister when she was widowed. She's remarried now and moved to Portland, so it's been sitting empty these past few months. She led them through the shop and out a back door into a small garden area. Beyond, separated from the main building by a neat gravel path lined with early spring flowers, stood a charming cottage. Its white-painted clapboard exterior and blue shutters gave it a cozy, welcoming appearance. 1 bedroom, a decent-sized front room, kitchen, and a small washroom with an indoor pump, Clara explained as she unlocked the door. Stove for heating. In winter, though May through September, you'll likely just need a small fire in the evenings. The interior was simply furnished, but clean and well-maintained. The front room would indeed accommodate a piano nicely, as Martha had suggested, with space remaining for a small settee and reading chair currently positioned near the window. The bedroom contained a double bed with a handsome quilt, a wardrobe, and a washstand with mirror. The kitchen, though compact, held everything necessary for a single person's needs. It's perfect, Eleanor said sincerely, already imagining herself at home in these modest but private rooms. Martha mentioned $7 monthly. That's right, including water and firewood, Clara confirmed. I'd ask for the first month in advance, and then payment at the start of each month thereafter. Eleanor quickly calculated her finances. With William's money for the train ticket now repurposed, she could afford the first month's rent with enough remaining for basic necessities until her teaching salary began. I'll take it, she decided. When could I move in? Today, if you wish, Clara said with a smile. It's been cleaned and is ready for occupation. I'll need to draw up a simple rental agreement, but that won't take long. As they walked back toward the dress shop to complete the arrangement, Gabriel spoke quietly to Eleanor. You'll need furniture, a piano at the very least for your teaching. Martha mentioned I could use the church piano initially, Eleanor replied. As for other furnishings, I can acquire them gradually as my finances allow. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. I might have some pieces at my workshop that would suit. Nothing fancy, but well made. He hesitated, then added, and I could build you a piano bench if you'd like, properly adjusted to the right height for teaching. The offer touched Eleanor deeply. That would be very kind, thank you. They parted ways at the dress shop after finalizing the rental agreement with Clara. Gabriel to return to his workshop, Eleanor to tell Oscar Jensen of her changed plans. As they said goodbye, Gabriel seemed on the verge of saying something more, but in the end merely nodded and turned away, his tall figure soon disappearing around the corner. Eleanor watched him go, reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to Pine Valley. What had begun as the crushing disappointment of William Preston's rejection had, in just 2 days, transformed into a promising new beginning. One that might offer not just professional fulfillment, but perhaps personal connections she had long since ceased to hope for. The remainder of the day passed in a whirl of activity. Oscar Jensen received the news of her decision to stay with evident satisfaction, refusing her offer to pay for the unused portion of the week at his boarding house. "Consider it Pine Valley's welcome gift," he insisted, echoing Gabriel's earlier sentiment. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor had moved her few possessions to the cottage, acquired basic provisions from Jensen's general store, and arranged to have a notice sent to Margaret Walsh in Boston, informing her of her new address and enclosing funds to settle her landlady's claim. Throughout the day, she was struck by the ready acceptance she received from townspeople who learned of her decision to stay. Becky Collins stopped by the cottage with a housewarming gift of fresh bread and preserves. Mrs. Thompson, mother of one of Martha's piano students, brought a vase of early spring flowers. Even Martha herself appeared briefly, leaning heavily on her cane but determined to deliver personally a set of sheet music, essential for any respectable piano teacher in Oregon. By early evening, Eleanor stood in the center of her new home, surrounded by these small kindnesses, feeling a sense of belonging she had not experienced since before the fire that scarred her. The cottage was still sparsely furnished. A functional kitchen, the bed and wardrobe in the bedroom, the settee and chair in the front room, but it already felt more like home than her Boston boarding house ever had. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. Opening it, she found Gabriel standing on her small porch, several men from the lumber mill behind him. Between them, they carried a piano. Not a grand instrument by any means, but a respectable upright in a walnut case. "Special delivery," Gabriel said, the undamaged side of his mouth lifting in that half-smile she found increasingly endearing. "Gabriel, what is this?" Eleanor asked, astonished, as the men carefully maneuvered the piano through the doorway and positioned it against the wall she had mentally designated for such an instrument. "Martha mentioned you'd need something to practice on," he replied with studied casualness. "This has been sitting in my workshop back room for years, needed new strings and action work, but it's properly tuned now." The lumber workers finished, positioning the piano, nodded respectfully to Eleanor, and departed with the easy camaraderie of men who had completed similar tasks together before. Gabriel remained, watching Eleanor's face as she approached the instrument with something like reverence. "It's beautiful," she said softly, running her fingers lightly over the keys, "but I couldn't possibly accept such a valuable gift." "Not exactly a gift," Gabriel clarified, "more of a long-term loan. It was my mother's, brought from Tennessee when I relocated here. Been sitting unused too long." Eleanor turned to face him, struck by the significance of this gesture. "You kept your mother's piano all these years, even after the fire?" Gabriel finished when she hesitated. "Yes, wasn't in the workshop when it happened. One of the few things that survived." He studied the piano with an expression of mingled sadness and resolution. "It should be played, not hidden away collecting dust. My mother would have wanted that." Touched beyond words by the trust implicit in this loan, Eleanor could only nod. After a moment, she found her voice. "I'll take good care of it, I promise." "I know you will," Gabriel said simply. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden object. "Also brought this, as promised." It was a piano bench, beautifully crafted from the same walnut as the piano, the perfect height for playing and teaching. The workmanship was exquisite, with subtle decorative details that revealed both skill and artistic sensibility. "You made this?" Eleanor asked, admiring the smooth finish and graceful lines. Yesterday evening and today, Gabriel confirmed. Wanted it ready for when you moved in. The realization that he had created this specifically for her, spending hours on the precise craftsmanship evident in every detail, left Eleanor momentarily speechless. Such care, such consideration went far beyond mere neighborly kindness. "Thank you," she said finally, knowing the words were inadequate. "It's perfect." Gabriel shrugged, seeming slightly embarrassed by her evident appreciation. "Just wood and time, nothing special." "We both know that's not true," Eleanor said quietly. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary." A faint tinge of color appeared on the undamaged side of Gabriel's face. He cleared his throat. "Should let you get settled. Town council meeting tomorrow evening, the railroad matter. Thought you might want to attend, given your interest yesterday." "Yes, I'd like that," Eleanor agreed, recognizing his change of subject as a sign of discomfort with her praise. "What time?" 7 o'clock at the town hall. I could escort you if you wish." The formal phrasing almost made Eleanor smile. For a man who worked with his hands and lived simply, Gabriel occasionally revealed hints of an upbringing that valued certain courtesies. "That would be very nice, thank you." After he departed, Eleanor returned to the piano, seating herself on the new bench and running her fingers lightly over the keys. The action was responsive, the tone warm and resonant, a far better instrument than she had expected to find in a frontier town, even one as relatively prosperous as Pine Valley. Almost without conscious decision, she began to play. Not the Chopin nocturne she had performed for Martha, but a simpler piece, a lullaby her mother had sung when she was a child. The familiar melody filled the cottage with memories, not painful now, but bittersweet, a connection to a past that had shaped her without defining her future. As the final notes faded, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness, of having found her place. After years of drifting, whatever challenges lay ahead, William Preston's disapproval, the adjustment to small-town life, building a new teaching practice, she would face them with the resilience that had brought her through worse trials. Morning brought a steady spring rain, turning Pine Valley's dirt streets to mud and casting a grey pall over the town. Eleanor spent the day with Martha Sullivan, not just observing but actively participating in the lessons, introducing herself to students and parents as their future teacher. The responses were uniformly positive, with several mothers expressing relief that their children's musical education would continue uninterrupted. By the time the last student departed at 4 o'clock, Martha was showing signs of fatigue, her arthritic hands visibly pained from demonstrating techniques throughout the day. "You should rest now," Eleanor told her gently. "I can tidy up here." Martha didn't argue, a testament to her exhaustion. "Town council meeting tonight," she said as she gathered her shawl. "Important you attend. Establish yourself as part of the community early." "Gabriel has offered to escort me," Eleanor replied, organizing sheet music into neat stacks. "Has he indeed?" Martha's shrewd eyes sparkled with interest. "Gabriel Harrington doesn't escort anyone as a rule. Keeps to himself, always has." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's simply being neighborly." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Martha retorted with a knowing smile. More seriously, she added, "Gabriel's a good man, Eleanor. Better than most in this town understand. His scars run deeper than the visible ones." "What happened to him?" Eleanor asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "In Tennessee, I mean. I know there was a fire, but I sense there's more to his story." Martha's expression grew solemn. "Not my tale to tell, my dear. If Gabriel wishes you to know, he'll share it in his own time." She patted Eleanor's hand. "Just remember, some wounds don't show on the surface but cut far deeper than those that do." With this cryptic advice, Martha departed, leaving Eleanor to ponder what hidden sorrows might lie behind Gabriel's reserved demeanor. Whatever tragedy had marked him beyond the fire that scarred his face, it had not diminished his capacity for kindness or consideration. That much was evident in every interaction she'd had with him. At 7:15, precisely as arranged, a knock sounded at Eleanor's door. The rain had slackened to a gentle drizzle, and Gabriel stood on her porch wearing a serviceable overcoat, a large umbrella in his hand. "Evening," he greeted her. "Thought you might need this." He handed her a second, smaller umbrella. "Streets are muddy, I'm afraid." The thoughtfulness of bringing her an umbrella touched Eleanor almost as much as the gift of the piano bench had. It suggested an attentiveness, a consideration of her comfort that she had rarely experienced from anyone since the fire. "Thank you," she said, accepting both the umbrella and the arm he offered to steady her as they navigated the slippery boardwalks. They were not the first to arrive at the town hall. Despite the inclement weather, a substantial crowd had gathered. The importance of the railroad decision drawing most of the town's business owners and many concerned citizens. Eleanor and Gabriel found seats near the middle of the room, close enough to hear clearly, but not so prominent as to draw undue attention. William Preston sat in the front row beside the distinguished-looking stranger Eleanor had seen the previous day. The railroad representative, she presumed. Neither man acknowledged their arrival, though Eleanor felt certain William was aware of her presence. At precisely 7 o'clock, Mayor Davis called the meeting to order, his portly figure commanding attention at the center of the raised platform, where the town council members sat. Beside him were Judge Thompson, clearly aligned with William Preston's interests, Councilman Parker, a thin, austere man who owned the lumber mill, Councilwoman Reed, a formidable widow who ran the town's only hotel, and Councilman Jensen, Oscar's cousin and proprietor of the livery stable. "Citizens of Pine Valley, Mayor," Davis began solemnly, "we gather tonight to discuss what may be the most significant decision in our town's history, whether to approve the Northern Pacific Railroad's proposed route through our community." He proceeded to outline the potential benefits: increased commerce, faster transportation of lumber and agricultural products to larger markets, passenger service to Portland and beyond, while acknowledging the disruption to existing businesses that would need to relocate if the proposed route were approved. The railroad representative, introduced as Mr. Lawrence Blackwell, then presented the company's formal proposal, complete with maps and engineering specifications. The route, as Gabriel had described earlier, would run directly through the center of town, requiring the demolition or relocation of several established businesses, including Gabriel's woodworking shop. The company recognizes the inconvenience this may cause to affected property owners, Mr. Blackwell stated smoothly. "We are prepared to offer compensation at 20% above current market value, plus additional funds for relocation expenses." This statement was met with murmurs from the crowd, some approving of the seemingly generous offer, others skeptical of whether it would truly cover the costs involved. Mayor Davis then invited public comments, beginning with those directly affected by the proposed route. Oscar Jensen spoke first, expressing concern about the disruption to his business during relocation and questioning whether the compensation would be sufficient to rebuild a comparable structure. Several other business owners echoed these concerns, including Becky Collins, who pointed out that her bakery oven could not simply be moved, but would need to be completely rebuilt at significant expense. When Gabriel's turn came, he rose from his seat beside Eleanor, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. Unlike the previous speakers, he did not focus on compensation or relocation costs. "Pine Valley began as a lumber settlement," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly through the hall. "But it's grown into a community, not just buildings and businesses, but people who have put down roots, formed connections, created something worth preserving." He gestured toward the map Mr. Blackwell had presented. This route was chosen, not because it's the only feasible path for the railroad, but because it serves certain interests at the expense of others. His gaze shifted briefly to William Preston before returning to the council. There are alternative routes that would bring the railroad's benefits without destroying what makes Pine Valley special. From his pocket, Gabriel withdrew a folded paper, which he handed to the mayor. This alternative proposal would route the tracks along the eastern edge of town, requiring minimal displacement of existing structures while still providing convenient access for freight and passengers. Mayor Davis examined the paper with evident surprise, then passed it to the other council members. "Where did you get these specifications, Mr. Harrington?" "I commissioned them from a railroad engineer in Portland," Gabriel replied, "at my own expense. I believe in progress, Mayor Davis, but not at the cost of our town's heart." This revelation caused a stir among both the council and the assembled citizens. William Preston's face darkened with anger, while Mr. Blackwell appeared distinctly uncomfortable. "The proposed alternative is impractical," the railroad representative asserted hastily. "The grade is too steep for—" "The grade is 4%, Gabriel interrupted calmly, "well within operational parameters for modern locomotives, according to your company's own published specifications." He turned to address the citizens directly. "I had these plans verified by 2 independent engineers. The eastern route would cost the railroad company approximately 12% more to construct, but would preserve nearly all existing businesses while still bringing the economic benefits everyone desires." William Preston rose to his feet, barely contained fury evident in his rigid posture. "This is outrageous. Harrington has no authority to propose alternative routes or consult with engineers. He's simply trying to protect his own interests at the expense of Pine Valley's future." "And you're not protecting your interests." This came from Becky Collins, who had stood up from her seat across the aisle. "Everyone knows you've been buying up property along Main Street for months, planning to build a hotel once the businesses are forced out by the railroad." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. William's face flushed with anger. "My investments in Pine Valley are perfectly legitimate business ventures. I make no apology for recognizing opportunity." "Opportunity at whose expense?" Eleanor found herself on her feet, the words emerging before she could reconsider. All eyes turned to her, and she felt a moment of panic at being the center of attention. But Gabriel's steady presence beside her gave her courage to continue. "I may be new to Pine Valley," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, "but even I can see that Mr. Preston's interests and those of the community are not necessarily aligned. A truly beneficial development would serve the many, not enrich the few." William's expression was thunderous. "Miss Mitchell, your input is neither requested nor relevant. As someone who will be departing on Friday's train, you have no stake in Pine Valley's future." "Actually," Eleanor responded, pleased by how steady her voice remained, "I've accepted the position as Martha Sullivan's replacement. I will be staying in Pine Valley permanently." This announcement caused another ripple of reaction through the crowd, largely positive from what Eleanor could discern. William looked momentarily disconcerted before his features settled back into disdainful displeasure. "The point remains," he said dismissively. "You've been here 3 days. Your understanding of our community's needs is necessarily limited." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged, "but I understand the value of preserving what works while embracing thoughtful change. From what I've observed, Gabriel's alternative proposal does exactly that." Mayor Davis, clearly sensing the meeting was veering into personal territory, rapped his gavel for order. "Let's return to the matter at hand. Mr. Blackwell, are you prepared to consider the alternative route Mr. Harrington has proposed?" The railroad representative looked distinctly uncomfortable, glancing between William Preston and the increasingly supportive crowd surrounding Gabriel. "A guide would need to consult with my superiors. The company has invested considerable resources in planning the current route. In other words, Councilwoman Reed said shrewdly, someone has already been promised certain benefits if the original route is approved. Her pointed gaze at Judge Thompson made it clear whom she suspected of such arrangements. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing, his silence more damning than any denial would have been. I propose we defer our decision until Mr. Blackwell has consulted with his company regarding the alternative route, Mayor Davis suggested, clearly seeking to diffuse the increasingly tense situation. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to vote on the matter. With evident reluctance, the council approved this motion, setting a date for the follow-up meeting. As the gathering disbanded, Eleanor found herself surrounded by townspeople offering congratulations on her decision to stay and appreciation for her support of Gabriel's alternative proposal. William Preston departed immediately, his angry stride taking him quickly through the crowd without acknowledging anyone. Mr. Blackwell followed more, slowly, looking troubled as he carefully folded the maps and documents he had presented. When the well-wishers had dispersed, Eleanor found Gabriel waiting patiently nearby, a peculiar expression on his scarred face, something like pride mixed with amusement. "You made quite an impression," he observed as they stepped out into the damp evening air. "I didn't intend to speak," Eleanor admitted. "It just happened. Some things need saying, whether planned or not." Gabriel opened his umbrella, holding it to shelter them both as they walked through the muddy street. "Thank you for your support." "Your alternative makes perfect sense," Eleanor replied honestly. "Anyone who truly cares about Pine Valley would see that." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Gabriel spoke again. "William won't forgive you for taking Martha's position and opposing him publicly in the same day. He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully." "I'm discovering," Eleanor said with unexpected lightness, "that William Preston's good opinion matters far less to me than I might once have believed." Gabriel's deep laugh surprised her, a warm, genuine sound she had not heard from him before. "Pine Valley's going to suit you, Miss Mitchell." "Eleanor," she corrected gently. "If we're to be allies against William Preston's schemes, we should at least be on a first-name basis, don't you think?" Something shifted in Gabriel's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Eleanor, then. And yes, I believe we should." They had reached her cottage gate. Eleanor paused, reluctant to end their conversation, but aware of the lateness of the hour and the proprieties that still governed interactions between unmarried men and women, even in this relatively informal frontier setting. "Would you like to come in for tea?" she offered, surprising herself with the boldness of the invitation. "It seems only fair to offer some hospitality after you've been so kind with the piano and bench." Gabriel hesitated, clearly torn between desire and convention. "Perhaps another time," he said finally. "It's getting late, and people talk, even in Pine Valley." Though disappointed, Eleanor appreciated his consideration for her reputation. "Another time, then," she agreed. "Thank you for escorting me tonight." "My pleasure," he replied, and something in his tone suggested he meant it quite literally. As she watched him walk away, his tall figure soon disappearing into the misty darkness, Eleanor reflected on how completely her life had transformed in just 3 days. From the crushing disappointment of William Preston's rejection to finding a place where her scars seemed to matter far less than her character and abilities. It was a change she could never have anticipated when she first stepped off the train. Inside her cottage, she lit the lamps and moved to the piano Gabriel had so generously provided. Running her fingers lightly over the keys, she began to play. Not a melancholy piece this time, but a hopeful melody that seemed to capture the unexpected joy she had discovered in this small Oregon town. Tomorrow would bring new challenges she knew, establishing her teaching practice, navigating the continuing tension with William Preston, learning more about the community she had chosen to join. But for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor Mitchell faced the future not with dread or resignation, but with genuine anticipation. And if some of that anticipation centered around a certain scarred woodworker with kind eyes and unexpected depths, well, that was a melody she was just beginning to explore. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Eleanor settled into her new life in Pine Valley. Each day brought fresh challenges and unexpected pleasures as she gradually transitioned from Martha's assistant to primary teacher. The elderly woman remained present for most lessons, offering guidance when needed, but increasingly allowing Eleanor to take the lead with students who had quickly warmed to her patient instruction and genuine enthusiasm. The cottage had become truly her home, transformed from sparse functionality to cozy comfort through small additions. A colorful braided rug from Clara Wilson's shop, curtains sewn from fabric Becky Collins had given as another housewarming gift. A bookshelf Gabriel had crafted to hold the small collection of music books Eleanor had begun to accumulate. Most precious of all was the framed daguerreotype of her parents that had arrived by post from Margaret Walsh in Boston. The one memento Eleanor had entrusted to her acquaintance's safekeeping years earlier, now displayed prominently beside the piano. On this particular morning, sunshine streamed through the east-facing windows as Eleanor practiced a challenging Mozart sonata, preparing for her performance at the Spring Music Festival just 3 days away. Her fingers moved confidently across the keys, the familiar notes flowing with an expressiveness that had been absent from her playing in Boston. Here in Pine Valley, music had once again become joy rather than mere livelihood. A knock at the doctor interrupted her practice. Opening it, she found Sophie Thompson, the 10-year-old daughter of Judge Thompson, standing on her doorstep clutching a music portfolio. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," the child said with careful politeness. "I know my lesson isn't until tomorrow, but Father suggested I might come early to practice the festival piece extra." Despite being the daughter of William Preston's primary ally on the town council, Sophie had proven to be one of Eleanor's most dedicated students. More significantly, in the weeks since Eleanor had taken over her lessons, the girl's reserved demeanor had gradually given way to genuine enthusiasm, particularly when her father was not present to maintain his expectations of proper decorum. "That's very conscientious of you, Sophie," Eleanor replied, ushering the child inside. "Let's see how the Mozart is coming along." Sophie settled at the piano, positioned her hands with careful precision, and began to play the simplified arrangement of Mozart's Rondo alla Turca that had been selected for her festival performance. Her technique was solid, her rhythm accurate, but Eleanor noticed a certain hesitancy in her interpretation. "Very good," Eleanor encouraged when Sophie finished. "Your fingering is perfect. Now, let's try it again, but this time, imagine you're telling a story with the music. What do you think this piece is saying?" Sophie's brow furrowed in concentration. "It sounds like maybe someone running or dancing." "Excellent observation. This was inspired by Turkish military bands, so there's definitely a sense of movement and energy. Try again, but this time feel that energy in your playing." The child's second attempt carried noticeably more spirit, her small face lighting with pleasure as the music came alive under her fingers. "That was wonderful." "Sophie!" Eleanor exclaimed when she finished. "You've captured exactly the right feeling." Sophie beamed at the praise, a rare, full smile transforming her usually serious countenance. "Do you really think I'll do well at the festival, Miss Mitchell?" "I'm certain of it," Eleanor assured her. "You've worked so hard, and it shows in your playing." The girl's smile faded slightly. "Father says I must perform perfectly. He says everyone will be watching because we're an important family." Eleanor recognized the weight of expectation in the child's voice. a burden she herself had carried in her youth, though for different reasons. Your father wants you to do well, and that's natural. But music isn't about perfection, Sophie. It's about expression, about sharing something beautiful with others. Sophie appeared to consider this novel concept. But what if I make a mistake? Then you'll continue playing just as you've practiced, Eleanor replied, matter-of-factly. Even the greatest pianists make occasional mistakes. The difference is that they don't let it disrupt the music's flow or the emotion they're conveying. This seemed to reassure the child somewhat. They spent another half-hour working on the piece, focusing on expression rather than technical perfection. By the time Judge Thompson's housekeeper arrived to escort Sophie home, the girl's playing had transformed from merely correct to genuinely musical. She has real talent, Eleanor remarked to the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, as Sophie gathered her. And music, the older woman nodded, a fond expression softening her otherwise stern features. She does at that. Takes after her mother, God rest her soul. The late Mrs. Thompson was quite the musician before she passed. This was the first Eleanor had heard of the judge's deceased wife. I didn't realize. How long ago did she die? 5 years now, Mrs. Finch replied, lowering her voice so Sophie wouldn't overhear. Consumption. The judge hasn't been the same since, more rigid, less forgiving. Used to be a fair man, before grief hardened him. This glimpse into Judge Thompson's personal tragedy added complexity to Eleanor's understanding of the man who had consistently supported William Preston's interests on the town council. Perhaps his alliance with William was less about shared values and more about a wounded man seeking direction after profound loss. After Sophie and Mrs. Finch departed, Eleanor returned to her own practice, but her thoughts kept straying to the upcoming town council meeting where the railroad route would finally be decided. The past weeks had seen increasing tension in Pine Valley as citizens took sides in the debate. The alternative route Gabriel had proposed had gained substantial support, particularly among those whose businesses would be displaced by the original plan. William Preston, however, had not been idle, using his considerable influence to sway opinions with promises of economic benefits and vague warnings about standing in the way of progress. Gabriel himself had maintained a dignified silence in public while working tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering additional engineering reports to support his alternative route and meeting individually with council members to address their concerns. His calm persistence impressed Eleanor greatly, especially given how much was at stake for him personally. Their own relationship had evolved into something Eleanor treasured but couldn't quite define. Warmer than friendship. Not quite. Openly courtship. Gabriel visited her cottage frequently, sometimes bringing small handcrafted gifts, a music stand, a doorstop, a clever folding table for the kitchen. Other times simply sharing evening conversation over tea. They had fallen into the habit of attending church together on Sundays, which had occasioned some raised eyebrows initially, but now seemed accepted as natural by most of the townspeople. What remained unspoken between them was the mutual attraction Eleanor felt, growing with each encounter. Gabriel was unfailingly respectful, never presuming or pushing boundaries. Yet she sometimes caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. For her part, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, and the depths of character his reserved manner concealed. A light tap at her window startled Eleanor from these reflections. Looking up, she saw Becky Collins gesturing urgently for her to come outside. Setting aside her music, Eleanor hurried to the door, concern rising at her friend's obvious agitation. "What's happened?" she asked as soon as she stepped onto the porch. "It's Martha," Becky said breathlessly. "She fell at the church this morning while practicing the organ for Sunday. Dr. Wilson says it's a broken hip. At her age, very serious. She's asking for you." Alarmed, Eleanor grabbed her shawl and followed Becky without hesitation. They hurried through town toward Martha's small house adjacent to the music school, passing townsfolk who called out questions about Martha's condition that Becky answered with quick reassurances. Dr. Wilson, a competent middle-aged woman who served as Pine Valley's physician, met them at Martha's door. "She's in considerable pain, but stable for now," the doctor explained quietly. "I've given her laudanum, which has helped, but at 74, this kind of injury." She left the concerning implications unspoken. "Can I see her?" Eleanor asked, briefly. "She's been asking for you specifically. Something about the festival arrangements." Martha lay in her narrow bed, her usually commanding presence diminished by pain and medication. Her sharp blue eyes, however, remained alert as Eleanor entered the room. "There you are," the elderly woman said, her voice weaker than normal but still carrying that characteristic directness. "Quite a mess I've made, falling like some careless child." "You mustn't worry about anything now," Eleanor soothed, taking a seat beside the bed. "Just focus on resting and healing." Martha made a dismissive sound. "At my age, healing from this sort of thing is wishful thinking, which is why I need to speak with you about the festival." "The festival can wait," Eleanor began, but Martha cut her off with a surprisingly forceful gesture. "It most certainly cannot. It's in 3 days, and I was to play the organ for the community chorus and accompany the children's choir. You'll need to take over those duties as well as your solo performance." Eleanor hadn't considered this additional responsibility. "But I haven't rehearsed with either group." "The music is straightforward, and you're more than capable," Martha stated with absolute certainty. "The chorus rehearses tonight at 7. The children tomorrow at 4. Her expression softened slightly. "This is why I chose you, Eleanor. Not just for your technical skill, but because you have the adaptability and strength this position sometimes requires." Touched by Martha's confidence and unable to refuse her in this condition, Eleanor nodded. "Of course I'll handle it. Please, don't worry about anything related to the festival or the students." "Good." Martha seemed to relax slightly. "One more thing. The festival committee meeting tonight, you'll need to attend in my place. 6 o'clock at the town hall before the chorus rehearsal." She gripped Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. "William Preston will try to use my absence to change the program order, putting his niece in the coveted final solo position instead of Gabriel's woodwind ensemble. Don't let him." This insight into the behind-the-scenes politics of the seemingly innocuous music festival surprised Eleanor. Why would the program order matter so much? "Because William can't stand that Gabriel has talents beyond his workshop," Martha replied with unexpected vehemence. "The ensemble is largely made up of lumber workers and their children. People William considers beneath his notice, but they've worked incredibly hard and they deserve that final spot. It's traditionally reserved for the most accomplished performance." Eleanor promised to maintain Martha's program order, then reluctantly took her leave when Dr. Wilson indicated the patient needed rest. Outside, she found Gabriel in conversation with Becky, having apparently just learned of Martha's accident. "How is she?" he asked, concern evident in his expression. "In pain, but still very much herself," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "Primarily worried about the festival arrangements, rather than her own condition." "That sounds like Martha," Gabriel agreed, his own lips quirking briefly. "I've sent word to her nephew in Portland. He should arrive by tomorrow's train." They walked together toward the center of town, Becky having returned to her bakery, after extracting a promise from Eleanor to update her on any developments with Martha's condition. "Martha wants me to attend the festival committee meeting tonight in her place," Eleanor mentioned as they neared the town hall. "Apparently there might be some controversy over the program order." Gabriel's expression shifted subtly. "Let me guess. William wants his niece to have the final performance slot. You knew about this. Martha warned me it might happen, he acknowledged. William's niece is visiting from San Francisco, supposedly quite accomplished on the violin. Though no one in Pine Valley has actually heard her play, he's been pressuring the committee for weeks. Martha was adamant that your ensemble should maintain the closing position, Eleanor told him. She said you've all worked very hard. Something like pride flickered in Gabriel's eyes. The men have, yes. Most had never touched an instrument before 3 months ago. Now they're playing a simplified Mozart piece with reasonable proficiency. It means a great deal to them to showcase this side of themselves to the town. The image of rough-handed lumber workers carefully learning to produce music touched Eleanor deeply. Then I'll certainly honor Martha's wishes regarding the program. Thank you, Gabriel said simply. They had reached the general store, where he apparently had business. Will I see you at the chorus rehearsal tonight? I play with them as well. You do? Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. What instrument? The undamaged side of Gabriel's mouth lifted in that half smile she found increasingly endearing. Cello. Not particularly well, but they're kind enough to tolerate my efforts. This revelation added yet another dimension to her understanding. Of the man before her, you continue to surprise me, Gabriel Harrington. I hope that's not unwelcome, he replied, something deeper than casual conversation in his tone. Not at all, Eleanor assured him, holding his gaze perhaps a moment longer than strictly proper. Quite the opposite, in fact. A faint flush colored the unmarked side of his face, and he cleared his throat. Until tonight, then? Eleanor watched him enter the store, a warm sensation expanding in her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. Then, remembering her responsibilities, she turned toward the music school. With Martha incapacitated, she would need to cancel or reschedule several lessons and prepare for her expanded role in the festival. The afternoon passed in a flurry of practical arrangements. Eleanor sent notes to affected students, practiced the choral accompaniments Martha had indicated, and visited her mentor once more to collect specific instructions regarding the festival committee meeting. By 6 o'clock, she felt reasonably prepared to represent Martha's interests, though still somewhat apprehensive about confronting William Preston in this semi-official capacity. The town hall's smaller meeting room was already occupied when Eleanor arrived, 5 people seated around a rectangular table covered with papers, program drafts, and a schedule board. She recognized most of them: Reverend Phillips from the church, Clara Wilson from the dress shop, Oscar Jensen representing the business community, and unfortunately, William Preston himself. The 5th person, a petite woman with elaborately styled dark hair and fashionable dress, was unfamiliar, but presumably William's niece from San Francisco. Miss Mitchell, Reverend Phillips greeted her warmly. We heard about your expanded responsibilities in poor Martha's absence. Most commendable of you to step in. Indeed, Clara added with genuine approval. Martha said you were exceptionally capable, and she's not one for empty compliments. William's expression remained coldly formal. How convenient that you should be positioned to take over so completely, Miss Mitchell. The insinuation was subtle but unmistakable, that Eleanor had somehow planned or even precipitated Martha's misfortune for her own benefit. Before she could formulate a measured response, Clara spoke up sharply. For heaven's sake, William, the woman fell while practicing music for our community's benefit. Surely even you can't suggest anything untoward in that. Looking somewhat chastened, though not apologetic, William introduced his niece. This is Miss Vanessa Miller, recently graduated from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. She has graciously agreed to perform at our humble festival during her visit. The young woman inclined her head with practiced elegance. "How charming to meet actual frontier musicians," she said, her tone making the words sound less than complimentary. "I understand you'll be playing a simple Mozart piece? How appropriate for a community gathering." Eleanor recognized the subtle condescension, but chose to respond with genuine courtesy. Mozart's genius lies in creating music that sounds simple while requiring considerable skill to perform well. "I look forward to hearing your interpretation of—" She glanced at the program. "Paganini's Caprice number 24. A very ambitious choice." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vanessa's perfectly composed features. "Uncle William assured me the local audience would appreciate virtuosic repertoire. I'm sure Pine Valley citizens will be most impressed," Eleanor replied diplomatically, taking the seat Reverend Phillips had pulled out for her. "Now, I understand we're finalizing the program order." William leaned forward immediately. "Yes, and I've proposed a small adjustment. Given Vanessa's exceptional training and the technical demands of her piece, it seems only fitting that she should close the program. The current arrangement has some sort of workers' ensemble in that position." "Martha was quite specific about maintaining the existing program order," Eleanor stated calmly. "The woodwind ensemble has been preparing for months specifically for this position of honor." William's expression hardened. "With all due respect to Martha's experience, I doubt she fully appreciated the caliber of performance my niece will deliver. Ending with anything less would be a disservice to the festival's artistic integrity. The final position has traditionally been reserved for the group or individual who best represents the community spirit of the festival," Reverend Phillips noted mildly. "It's less about technical virtuosity and more about exemplifying Pine Valley's collective musical growth." "Precisely," Eleanor agreed. "And from what I understand, the ensemble represents exactly that. People who had never played music before, coming together to create something beautiful through dedication and hard work." Vanessa looked increasingly uncomfortable with the discussion. "Uncle, perhaps we're making too much of this. I'm perfectly content to perform wherever the committee feels is appropriate." William shot his niece a quelling glance before returning his attention to the group. "I must insist we put this to a vote. As the festival's primary financial patron, I believe my perspective deserves particular consideration." Clara Wilson's expression suggested she found this appeal to wealth distasteful, but she nodded reluctantly. "Very well. All in favor of maintaining the original program order as established by Martha Sullivan." Eleanor, Reverend Phillips, and Oscar Jensen raised their hands. "Those in favor of moving Miss Miller's performance to the closing position." Only William raised his hand, looking displeased when his niece kept hers firmly in her lap. "The majority has spoken," Clara announced with evident satisfaction. "The program remains as Martha arranged it." William's jaw tightened, but he offered no further argument. The remainder of the meeting proceeded efficiently, addressing practical matters of seating arrangements, refreshments, and schedule timing. By 6:45, they had resolved all outstanding issues. As they gathered their papers, Vanessa approached Eleanor with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "You're the new piano teacher, aren't you? The one who replaced Martha Sullivan?" "I am," Eleanor confirmed, studying the younger woman more carefully. Despite her earlier condescension, there seemed to be actual interest in her expression now. "I heard you were from Boston," Vanessa continued. "Did you study at the conservatory?" "There? I did, yes, many years ago now." "Then you must know Professor Hamilton?" "He was my primary instructor," Eleanor acknowledged, surprised by this connection. Something like respect entered Vanessa's eyes. "He's considered one of the finest teachers in the country. My own professor studied with him." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "I hope you won't judge me too harshly for my uncle's behavior. He means well, but he can be rather forceful." in his opinions. This unexpected olive branch touched Eleanor. Not at all, and I look forward to hearing your performance. Paganini on the violin is quite challenging. That's actually why I was so nervous about closing the program, Vanessa admitted with disarming candor. The final variation is still giving me trouble, and I'd rather not have it be the last thing the audience hears if I don't manage it imperfectly. Eleanor couldn't help but smile at this honesty, a very professional attitude. Perhaps we could find time for you to practice in the music school tomorrow. The acoustics are better than most private parlors. I'd appreciate that very much, Vanessa replied with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. As they left the town hall together, Eleanor spotted William waiting impatiently by an expensive carriage. Seeing his niece in conversation with Eleanor, his expression darkened noticeably. "I should go," Vanessa said, noticing her uncle's disapproval. "Thank you for the offer of practice space. Perhaps tomorrow afternoon." 2 o'clock would work well, Eleanor suggested. "I'll be there preparing for the children's choir rehearsal at 4. Vanessa nodded agreement before hurrying to join her visibly displeased uncle. As Eleanor watched them depart, she reflected on the unexpected complexity of human relationships. William Preston remained as pompous and controlling as ever, yet he had produced a niece with apparent humility and genuine musical passion. People, it seemed, were rarely as simple as first impressions might suggest. The church was filling with chorus members when Eleanor arrived for the rehearsal. She spotted Gabriel immediately, setting up his cello near the back of the group, his large frame somewhat incongruous among the predominantly female singers. He looked up as she entered, that now familiar half-smile warming his scarred features. The next 2 hours proved both challenging and unexpectedly enjoyable, as Eleanor worked with the chorus on their festival selections. Gabriel remained quietly focused on his part, occasionally exchanging amused glances with her when certain singers became particularly dramatic about tempo or dynamics. His cello playing, contrary to his modest assessment, was quite competent. Not virtuosic certainly, but musical and supportive of the ensemble. After the rehearsal concluded, he lingered as Eleanor gathered her music. "How did the committee meeting go?" he asked, carefully loosening his bow before placing it in its case. "Your ensemble's position is secure," she assured him with a smile. William wasn't pleased, but he was outvoted. "Thank you," Gabriel said simply. "It means a great deal to the men." "So I gathered from what Martha told me. Eleanor secured the last of her sheet music in her portfolio. I also met William's niece. She's not what I expected." "No?" Gabriel carefully placed his cello in its case, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the instrument. "She seems genuinely passionate about music and rather more humble than her uncle. She was nervous about performing Paganini as the closing piece." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. "People aren't always what they appear. On first acquaintance, especially those who've been shaped by someone like William Preston." The insight reminded Eleanor of something Martha had said about Gabriel himself, that his scars ran deeper than the visible ones. The reminder prompted her to ask, "Will you walk me home? I'd welcome the company, and there's something I'd like to ask you." A flash of wariness crossed his face, but he nodded. "Of course." The evening air had cooled considerably, stars emerging in the clear sky above Pine Valley. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes before Eleanor gathered her courage. "Gabriel, in the weeks I've been here, you've shared much about your work, your music, your concerns for Pine Valley's future, but very little about your past, beyond the basic facts of the fire in Tennessee." He remained silent, though she sensed his body tensing slightly beside her. "I don't mean to pry," she continued gently, "but I feel as though I'm holding only pieces of a larger picture. Martha mentioned that your scars go deeper than the visible ones, and Martha talks too much, Gabriel interrupted, his tone uncharacteristically harsh. Then, more softly, I'm sorry. That was unfair. They had reached the small bridge that crossed the creek near Eleanor's cottage. Gabriel stopped, gazing down at the water reflecting starlight. What happened in Tennessee wasn't just a workshop fire, he said finally, his deep voice barely audible above the gentle gurgle of the stream. It was deliberately set. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Who would do such a thing? Gabriel's profile was rigid in the darkness. Men who disapproved of my friendship with a former slave named Isaiah Washington. He was a gifted woodworker who had established his own small business after the war. I hired him to help with a large commission, treated him as an equal. Some in town found that unacceptable. The pain in his voice made Eleanor's heart ache. They set the fire because of that? They came at night, a group of them, masked, set the workshop ablaze while Isaiah and I were working late. His hands gripped the bridge railing with white-knuckled intensity. Isaiah didn't make it out. I tried to reach him, but the roof collapsed. That's how I got these. He gestured to his scarred face and sighed. Eleanor reached out instinctively, covering his hand with her own. Gabriel, I'm so sorry. The authorities called it an accident, he continued, his voice flat. Said a lamp must have overturned. Everyone knew the truth, but no one would speak it. My own family suggested I'd been reckless, that I should have known better than to associate inappropriately with Isaiah. The depth of this injustice stunned Eleanor. So you left. Once I recovered enough to travel. Couldn't bear to stay. Where Isaiah's murderers walked free, where my own kin chose comfort over truth. His voice caught slightly. Came west because distance seemed the only possible peace. Understanding bloomed within Eleanor, why Gabriel had stood so firmly against William Preston's manipulations, why he fought to protect what he had built in Pine Valley, why he recognized in her own scars more than just physical damage. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, sensing how difficult the revelation had been for him. He turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. Few in Pine Valley know this story, not something I speak of. I understand, Eleanor assured him, and I'm honored by your trust. They stood in silence for a long moment, her hands still resting on his, the weight of his shared history settling. Between them, not as a barrier but as deeper understanding. It's late, Gabriel said finally. You should rest. Tomorrow will be busy with festival preparations. Eleanor nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. Yes, though I'd rather continue our conversation. Perhaps after the festival, he suggested, something like hope flickering in his eyes. When things are less hectic. I'd like that very much, Eleanor replied, realizing with sudden clarity how much she had come to care for this complex, honorable man. He escorted her the remaining distance to her cottage door, maintaining a respectful silence that nevertheless felt intimate rather than awkward. As they said goodnight, Eleanor found herself wondering what might develop between them after the festival, and hoping with unexpected intensity that William Preston's machinations would not prevent Gabriel from maintaining his place in the community he had chosen as sanctuary after such profound loss. The morning of the Spring Music Festival dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect day that seemed designed for celebration. Throughout Pine Valley, excitement was palpable as townspeople donned their finest clothes and businesses closed early in preparation for the afternoon's events. Eleanor had barely slept, her mind filled with both anticipation and anxiety about her multiple responsibilities. Between her own piano performance, accompanying both the adult chorus and children's choir, and managing the entire program in Martha's absence, the day promised to be overwhelming. Yet beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper emotional current. Gabriel's revelation about his past in Tennessee had shifted something fundamental between them, creating a new intimacy she found herself cherishing. By noon, Eleanor had visited Martha, whose condition remained stable though painful, delivered final instructions to the children's choir, and practiced her own performance piece one last time. Now she stood in her bedroom, contemplating her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. For this special occasion, she had splurged on fabric from Clara Wilson's shop, and with the dressmaker's generous assistance, created a gown of deep teal silk that complemented her chestnut hair and hazel eyes. The modest neckline and long sleeves suited both the occasion and Eleanor's sense of propriety, while the rich color and careful tailoring lent an elegance she hadn't allowed herself since before the fire. Clara had designed the bodice with subtle asymmetry, incorporating decorative elements on the left side that drew the eye and transformed Eleanor's scarred cheek from a flaw to simply another aspect of her appearance. The effect wasn't to hide her scars, but to integrate them into her overall presentation, exactly what Gabriel had managed with his own disfigurement. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. Opening it, Eleanor found Sophie Thompson on her doorstep, dressed in a pale blue frock with white ribbons, her usually severe hairstyle softened into loose curls. "Miss Mitchell, you look beautiful," the child exclaimed with uncharacteristic exuberance. "As do you, Sophie," Eleanor replied, genuinely touched by the compliment. "Are you ready for your performance?" Sophie nodded, though a flicker of nervousness crossed her features. "Father says the whole town will be watching, and they'll all be delighted by your playing," Eleanor assured her, remembering their conversation about perfection versus expression. "Remember what we discussed. The music matters more than any small mistakes." This seemed to calm the girl. "Miss Collins asked me to tell you they're starting to set up chairs in the town square, and Mr. Harrington is looking for you about the piano placement." Eleanor gathered her music portfolio and festival program, then took Sophie's hand as they walked toward the town center. The main square had been transformed with bunting and flower arrangements, wooden chairs arranged in neat rows before a raised platform where the performances would take place. Gabriel stood beside the upright piano that had somehow been transported from the church, deep in conversation with several men regarding its precise positioning. He looked up as Eleanor approached, his conversation faltering mid-sentence. For a moment, he simply stared, something like wonder in his expression before he collected himself. You look," he began, then seemed unable to find adequate words. "So do you," Eleanor replied with a smile, noting how his usual work clothes had been replaced by a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized his height and breadth of shoulder. Someone had trimmed his hair, and his beard was neatly groomed, framing rather than concealing the scarred side of his face. Sophie, observing this exchange with a child's perception, giggled softly before excusing herself to find her father. "Is the piano arrangement suitable?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to the instrument. "Yes, though we've been debating the angle for maximum visibility without sun glare," Gabriel replied, regaining his composure. He lowered his voice slightly. "How are you feeling about today? It's a significant responsibility you've taken on." The genuine concern in his tone warmed Eleanor, nervous but prepared. "Martha's organization has made it manageable. You'll excel," he said with quiet confidence. "You already have, in ways that extend far beyond music." Before Eleanor could respond to this unexpectedly personal comment, William Preston appeared, escorting his niece Vanessa toward the platform. He nodded curtly to Eleanor, pointedly ignored Gabriel, and began instructing the workers about the special requirements for his niece's violin performance. Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I should check on my ensemble," They're more nervous than they'll admit. They'll perform wonderfully, Eleanor assured him, especially with you leading them. A hint of a smile touched his lips. We'll see. Their enthusiasm sometimes exceeds their technical abilities, but there's genuine heart in their playing. As Gabriel departed, Eleanor found herself increasingly surrounded by festival participants seeking guidance, confirmation, or reassurance. The children's choir needed final positioning instructions, the adult chorus had questions about the processional, and various soloists wanted to verify their place in the program. By the time the audience began arriving at 2 o'clock, Eleanor had barely had a moment to collect her thoughts. From her position near the piano, she observed the gathering crowd with a mixture of nervousness and pride. Nearly everyone in Pine Valley had come, dressed in their Sunday best, faces eager with anticipation. Even those who might normally avoid. Cultural events seemed determined to participate in this community celebration. At precisely 2:30, Reverend Phillips stepped onto the platform to welcome the audience and offer an opening prayer. Then Eleanor took her place at the piano to accompany the children's choir, whose sweet voices rose in a traditional folk melody that had been a Pine Valley tradition for years. The program proceeded smoothly from there. Young Sophie performed. Her Mozart piece, with only one minor hesitation, quickly recovered. The adult chorus sang with more enthusiasm than precision, but earned warm applause, and various solo performances showcased unexpected talents hidden beneath the town's everyday routines. William's niece, Vanessa, proved genuinely gifted. Her violin technique impressive despite a few struggles with the most technically demanding passages of her Paganini piece. The audience responded with enthusiastic appreciation, clearly recognizing true artistry regardless of the performer's connection to William Preston. When Eleanor's turn came to perform her solo piece, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, she approached the piano with outward calm that belied her racing heart. As her fingers touched the keys, however, the familiar sensation of music flowing through her pushed aside all nervousness. The complex emotions of the past weeks, rejection, discovery, new beginnings, and budding affection, found expression through Chopin's passionate composition. When the final notes resonated across the square, the moment of silence before applause erupted told Eleanor she had connected with her audience in the way that mattered most. After acknowledging the applause with a modest bow, Eleanor resumed her accompanying duties for the final performances. Gabriel's woodwind ensemble, comprised primarily of lumber workers and their teenage children, took their positions for the closing number. Their Mozart arrangement, though simplified from the original, represented countless hours of practice stolen from precious leisure time. Gabriel himself conducted rather than played, his large hands guiding the amateur musicians with gentle authority. What the performance lacked in technical perfection, it more than compensated for in genuine emotion and commitment. When they reached the final movement, executed with surprising precision, Eleanor found herself blinking back unexpected tears at this tangible evidence of what ordinary people could achieve when given opportunity and encouragement. The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming, not just polite appreciation, but standing, heartfelt recognition of their neighbor's accomplishment. Even William Preston rose, though his applause seemed perfunctory compared to the enthusiastic response surrounding him. As the formal program concluded and the gathering transitioned to the celebratory reception, Eleanor found herself receiving congratulations from virtually everyone in attendance. Parents praised her work with their children, audience members commented on her sensitive performance, and Martha's former students expressed gratitude for her willingness to continue their instruction. "You've triumphed today," came Gabriel's voice as the crowd around her finally thinned. "Martha would be proud." "As should you," Eleanor replied warmly. "Your ensemble was magnificent." The genuine smile that transformed his scarred features made her heart quicken. They exceeded my expectations, and more importantly, their own. Before Eleanor could respond, William Preston approached, his expression inscrutable. "Miss Mitchell," he acknowledged with formal correctness. The festival was surprisingly successful, despite Martha's unfortunate absence. Your contributions were notable. Coming from William, this qualified praise represented significant concession. "Thank you, Mr. Preston. Your niece performed admirably as well." Something shifted in William's expression, a fleeting vulnerability quickly masked. "Vanessa has expressed interest in extending her visit to receive some instruction from you. She seems to believe your musical understanding would complement her technical training." This unexpected request momentarily stunned Eleanor. "I'd be honored to work with her, of course." William nodded stiffly. "I shall inform her. Good day, Miss Mitchell." With a pointed failure to acknowledge Gabriel, he turned and walked away. That, Gabriel observed quietly, might be the closest thing to an olive branch William Preston is capable of extending. Eleanor considered this assessment. Perhaps, though I suspect it's more his niece's doing than any change of heart on his part. Regardless, it represents a certain acceptance of your place in Pine Valley, Gabriel noted. He hesitated, then added more softly, one that many of us recognized far sooner. The warmth in his voice prompted Eleanor to meet his gaze directly. "Gabriel, after the reception, would you? That is, might we continue our conversation from the other evening? There's much I'd still like to discuss." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "I'd like that very much." The reception lasted another hour, with townsfolk lingering to enjoy refreshments and conversation in the pleasant spring afternoon. When Eleanor finally managed to extricate herself, pleading fatigue and responsibility for returning the musical scores to the church, Gabriel quietly offered to assist her. They walked in companionable silence through the early evening light, the gentle glow of sunset bathing Pine Valley in gold. After delivering the music to its proper storage, they found themselves alone in the church garden, a peaceful enclave of flowering shrubs and simple wooden benches. "What you shared with me about Tennessee," Eleanor began softly, "helps me understand why this place, this community, means so much to you." Gabriel nodded, his expression solemn. "Pine Valley gave me a chance to rebuild when I believed nothing was left. The workshop isn't just my livelihood, it's proof that destruction doesn't have the final word." "I understand that now, in ways I couldn't before," Eleanor admitted. "When William rejected me because of my scars, it felt like confirmation of everything I'd feared since the fire, that I would forever be defined by that single moment, that single aspect of my appearance." Gabriel's gaze remained steadfast on her face, seeing her completely. "Yet here you are, having built something new in just a few weeks. The town saw your true value today, as they've seen yours over these years," Eleanor acknowledged. "We're more alike than I initially realized, not just in our visible scars, but in our determination to create meaning beyond them." "And Eleanor," Gabriel said, her name sounding like a caress in his deep voice, "since you arrived in Pine Valley, I found myself wondering if there might be something more than just similar experiences connecting us." Her heart quickened at this careful declaration. "I've wondered the same." Gabriel took her hand gently in his, the calluses of his carpenter's fingers warm against her skin. "I'm not a man of many words, as you've likely noticed, but I want you to know that these past weeks have awakened feelings I thought lost forever. You've helped me remember that life can hold beauty and possibility, even after profound loss." Emotion tightened Eleanor's throat as she interlaced her fingers with his. "When I stepped off that train and faced William's rejection, I believed I'd reached the end of all hopes. I never imagined I might instead be at the beginning of something far more meaningful. I can't offer wealth or social position, Gabriel continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Just honest work, a genuine heart, and the promise to see you, truly see you, every day for as long as you'll allow. Those are the only things that matter, Eleanor replied softly. Everything else is just trappings. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with shared understanding and emerging love. Neither pulled away from the other's scars. Instead, their marks of survival seemed to dissolve in the perfection of the moment, not forgotten, but integrated into the wholeness of who they were together. When they finally parted, the last golden light of day illuminating their faces, Eleanor felt a sense of homecoming deeper than any she had known before. Like the phoenix of ancient myth, she had risen from the ashes of her former life, her scars not disfigurements, but badges of courage that had led her to this man, this community, this future rich with promise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.